The chamber gleamed with sterile elegance, a monument to peace built by species who had known far too little of it, suspended in orbit above a nameless neutral planet. The council hall of the Galactic Accord was a marvel of shared engineering, its vast interior ringed with gravitic architecture that allowed each delegate to exist in their preferred environmental conditions and yet still meet face to face. From the avian circorn, cloaked in mist, to the crystalline Tornai who shimmered in hard vacuum, the hall adjusted itself with quiet precision. It was said that the room listened better than most politicians did. Ambassador Lynn Sarai of Earth walked the central aisle, her pace calm and her posture precise. Her uniform, sleek deep gray, tailored, bore no ornamentation beyond the small silver sigil over her heart, a stylized tree rooted in a globe, the human emblem. She wore no weapons, needed no entourage beyond two silent aides who flanked her like shadows. Yet the air around her prickled. Tension? Anticipation? Perhaps both. Delegates watched her pass. Some whispered, delicate clicks of mandibles, subsonic purrs, neural pulses exchanged over encrypted networks. Earth's ambassador was young, by interstellar standards. Her species, younger still. And yet, since joining the Accord only 30 standard cycles ago, humanity had risen with alarming speed. They traded aggressively, negotiated with surgical charm, and it was rumored had never forgotten a slight. Lynn reached the center of the floor and bowed her head, just slightly, toward the high conductor of the council, a centenarian from the aquatic Mallory Combine, whose voice was filtered through a floating translation drone. Ambassador Sarai, the Accord recognizes a delegation of Earth. You may proceed. Lynn nodded, stepped forward, and activated the small hollow panel embedded in the floor. A subtle shimmer ran across the walls as the chamber shifted modes, from deliberation to declaration. She did not raise her voice, nor change her tone. Honored species of the Accord, I bring the voice of Earth, unified and whole. We are grateful to share in this forum of peace. And yet, a pause, subtle, deliberate. The hall leaned closer. It is peace itself that now demands clarity. The hollow lit up behind her, a cascade of treaty violations, intercepted trade routes, and evidence of economic sabotage directed at Earth and its allied systems. Not accusations. Facts. No commentary. Only chronology. Over the last 6 cycles, our systems have registered 34 coordinated economic disruptions originating from various members of this council. Some subtle, some overt, none addressed through proper diplomatic channels. Murmurs rippled through the room. A dozen species flickered in color, clicked their teeth, or blinked in defense. We recognize that diplomacy, Lynn continued, is rarely conducted without pressure. And Earth, being young among you, expected tests. We did not take offense. She let that land, then added with surgical calm. We prepared. The murmurs halted. Lynn swiped her fingers through the air. A new diagram appeared, radial, abstract, like a spiderweb. At its center was Earth. From it radiated projections, simulations, lines of influence extending into every known civilization's political, economic, and defensive structures. The projections were dense, predictive, alive. Our analysts have developed contingency frameworks for each member of this chamber, Lynn said, not out of hostility, but from necessity. Should negotiations ever falter? The torn-eyed delegate flickered with internal light. Is this a threat? No, Lynn replied instantly. It's a statement of fact. Another delegate, the towering insectoid Harnzar, clicked furiously. You suggest Earth has planned for war with every species in this room? Earth has planned for every outcome, Lynn said. Cooperation, coercion, collapse. It is our way. You planned for our failure. We simply reciprocated. That word, reciprocated, hung in the air like a blade. Silence fell. Even the breathing systems dimmed, as though afraid to make a sound. Lynn allowed it to sit, then gave the smallest of smiles. It wasn't smug. It was professional. A smile that told the council she had finished her opening statement and left them to draw their own conclusions. The Mallory High conductor's drone buzzed low. Ambassador, you speak of peace, yet you bring models of war. No, she replied. "I bring models of prevention." From the side chambers, an elder of the Heroin Confederacy, usually silent, let out a slow breath, a series of harmonic tones. "You came here to tell us you're watching us." "I came to tell you," Lynn said evenly, "that Earth is listening. Always. We hear what is not said. We feel what trembles beneath the surface. We are not here to threaten. We are here to remind." "And what," asked the crystalline Tornai, voice sharp, "are we being reminded of?" Lynn's gaze moved slowly across the room, meeting no one's eyes and yet touching everyone's. That Earth survived its own extinction. Twice. That we learned diplomacy through centuries of war. That we unified under pressure, not peace. And that, if cornered, we do not ask whether we can survive. We calculate how. Her words were not loud, but their weight was undeniable. The council chamber, so often full of bluster and pomp, had never been so still. Then, softly, she said, "This is not a threat. It's an assurance. Earth wishes for cooperation, but we are not naive. We came prepared." The room held its breath. Behind Lynn, the model flickered off. Darkness returned to the center of the chamber. Her message was done. She bowed again, slightly lower this time, and stepped back. One of her aides tapped a finger to a comlink, unseen by most. A silent signal, transmitted only to Earth's fleet. No action, just readiness. A protocol drilled 1,000 times. As Lynn retook her place, the High Conductor's drone tried to form a response, but paused. Perhaps choosing silence for once was wiser, and across the hall, where power once rested easily in the claws and coils of ancient empires, a new understanding began to settle like frost. Earth was no longer the pupil, no longer the outlier. It had joined the game, and it had brought its own rules. The council had come expecting a voice. Instead, they had found a mirror, and in that reflection, none saw themselves as invincible, only prepared. And that was enough, for now. Earth's first glimpse of the Galactic Accord was through a signal. 3 pulses of structured gamma radiation intercepted by a deep-orbit AI satellite above Europa. At the time, most governments dismissed it as either a glitch or a hoax. But within 40 hours, a relay station in the Kuiper Belt received a return code embedded with physics no human had written. That was the day Earth realized it was not alone. And it never would be again. In the months that followed, secrecy crumbled under the weight of inevitability. By the time contact was formalized, humanity's leaders had fractured into camps. Some hopeful, others defensive, and a few that prepared quietly for the worst. Amid that chaos, the United Diplomatic Agency was born, drawing from the brightest across science, military, and political spheres. It was not the most powerful organization on Earth, but it would become the most dangerous. Its crown was the Protocol Office. Lynn Sarai joined it at 27. She wasn't the most charismatic diplomat, nor the highest-ranking strategist. What made her indispensable was her mind, observational acuity paired with emotional restraint. In a simulated negotiation environment, she once navigated a 9-party peace accord while concurrently identifying an embedded saboteur, avoiding 6 cultural offenses, and rerouting 3 surveillance bugs, all within 27 minutes. She didn't smile during it. She rarely smiled at all. At the time, she believed that knowledge was the ultimate weapon. She learned otherwise soon enough. Her first off-world assignment was a silent one, observation only. She spent 3 cycles embedded with Earth's data collection outposts, watching transmissions from council members, reverse engineering protocols, studying minor incidents and major scandals alike. She watched how the Kaleni disguised threats as poetry, how the Felgravin used trade embargoes to force system realignment, how even the peaceful Lyri had once silenced a rebellion through a temporary atmospheric destabilization. It became obvious the Galactic Accord maintained peace not by trust, but by mutually assured foresight. Every species played its own game, just beneath the surface of diplomacy. Earth had arrived late, but it could still learn fast. The Protocol Office assigned her to Task Directive 71, codenamed Canopy. Its mission was stark: produced scenario-based models for every known species capable of offensive or coercive action against Earth. It was enough to assume good faith. Contingency would be Earth's shield. Lynn built a team of analysts, tacticians, cryptographers, psychologists, and artificial intelligence systems. Together, they mapped networks of influence across the Council. Resource dependencies, trade imbalances, territorial disputes. They cross-referenced language patterns with historical action. They analyzed ceremonial rituals not for cultural understanding, but for signs of manipulation. She spent 3 years assembling the Contingency Web, a dense, predictive network of simulated responses to potential aggression from every species in the Accord. It was a monumental effort. Most of the Council never imagined Earth had the reach to model their weaknesses. Fewer still guessed that Earth had quietly infiltrated secondary markets and data flows across their systems. Never maliciously, never openly. Just enough to know. Lynn never called it espionage. She called it insurance. During the second Drexel trade dispute, a minor scuffle by galactic standards, Earth's response shocked the Council. A single message, a footnote in the negotiation protocol, pointed out a previously undiscovered Drexel supply chain vulnerability. The dispute ended in 2 days. No threats, no violence, just data. After that, Earth stopped being underestimated. The real shift came 2 cycles later, when the starry hegemony attempted to sideline Earth from a key trade network using proxy negotiators. Earth didn't retaliate publicly. Instead, Lynn's team flooded the Starry's diplomatic databases with false cultural predictions, harmless at first. But over time, Starry alliances began to fray from minor missteps. A mispronounced word here, an inappropriate gift there. No casualties, just chaos. Enough to remind them that Earth could pull threads, too. Not everyone approved. Even within the protocol office, there were voices questioning whether Earth was becoming what it once feared. Lynn didn't answer them. She didn't need to. The models were working. Earth had no wars, no invasions, no betrayals. Not yet. She often sat alone in her office after the corridors dimmed for night, reviewing models, rechecking behavioral algorithms, watching simulation outcomes shift with the smallest inputs. A single phrase, placed with care, could derail a conflict before it ever began. But it also meant she lived in a world of hypotheticals. Trust, in her universe, was a variable to be managed. The most troubling aspect wasn't the alien threats. It was a realization that most conflicts in the Council weren't born from malice, but misunderstanding, protocol breaches, cultural slights, historical amnesia. In that chaos, humanity's greatest weapon wasn't strength. It was clarity, and that clarity came at a cost. She remembered her last meeting with Director Ian, her former mentor. It had been brief, as most things between them were. They'll call you paranoid. Ian had said, hands folded, face unreadable. They'll say Earth is preparing for enemies it hasn't made yet. And when they become enemies? Lynn asked. Then they'll say we were right, Ian replied. But they won't thank you. I don't need thanks. No, Ian said. But someday you might wish you'd asked for permission. Lynn had said nothing then. And when Ian left, she activated the next scenario in the contingency web, the Tornai proximity collapse model. Probability, 4%. Damage mitigation, 78%. Risk factor, high. Now, standing in the council chamber, Lynn felt the weight of those models behind her words. The web they'd built, the lives they'd never had to save, because the moves had been played before anyone realized the board was set. But knowledge did not buy peace, only vigilance. The chamber still echoed with silence from her disclosure. Delegates leaned inward, their internal translators buzzing as they processed. Some were no doubt calculating how to discredit her, others, how to verify her claims. Lynn remained impassive. She remembered her first lesson from Canopy. Every room has a truth no one is saying. Your job is to speak it before someone else does. And so she had. The silence broke when a delegate from the Saphari Accord, a serpentine being coiled in synthetic fluid, addressed her, its tone surprisingly gentle. Ambassador Sarai, it said, I do not know whether to fear you or admire you. She inclined her head. White shoes. The chamber buzzed with voices again, low, fragmented, unresolved. Lynn didn't listen to the words. She listened to the patterns. The energy in the room had changed. Slightly. Enough. The opening move had landed. She would not win every hand. But Earth had entered the game not to gamble. It had come to remind the galaxy. Humans may be late to the table, but they always studied the deck. By the third day of deliberations, the air in the council chamber had thickened, not with threat, but with something more dangerous: calculation. The delegates no longer spoke of Earth as a peripheral actor. They referred to humanity with the wary reverence once reserved for ancient powers. And in that shift, Lynn Sarai saw the beginning of something far more volatile than war: relevance. Relevance brought expectation and scrutiny. Lynn kept her routine unchanged. Each morning, she reviewed council communications, observed fluctuations in interspecies protocols, and cross-checked with Earth's deep simulation nodes, which continually ran real-time behavior models of council members. Every twitch of tendril, every change in phrasing, every omitted gesture, her system logged it all. It wasn't paranoia. It was pattern recognition. But today, a deviation occurred. A request for a closed diplomatic corridor came through, not from one of Earth's allies, but from the Chiron Dominion, a faction known more for conquest and conversation. Their representative, Vextal, was a being of shifting fractal geometry, held together by a stasis field that hummed with barely restrained energy. Chironth rarely made contact unless they sought advantage. That they requested privacy now was enough to make Lynn pause. Still, she accepted. The corridor was narrow, walled by polarized crystal. Visuals were minimal, and the acoustic field filtered ambient sounds into complete silence. Lynn entered alone. Vextal stood, or floated, opposite her, flickering between geometric forms. "I come," it began, not with accusation, but with curiosity. Lynn waited. The Chiron didn't waste breath on flattery. "You revealed your contingency frameworks," it said. "You made the council unsettled. But that's not what concerns me." Lynn tilted her head. "Then what does?" "That you didn't need to reveal them. And yet you did." There it was. The real conflict wasn't Earth's rise. It was Earth's intent. Lynn let the silence stretch just long enough to make the point. "We revealed them because we are not interested in shadows. Earth has nothing to gain by frightening the Accord into silence. But we do gain by clarifying what deterrence looks like. Or by marking territory." Vextal countered, like a young predator showing its teeth. "If Earth were hunting," she said evenly, "you'd already be bleeding." A pause. Then, to her surprise, Vextal pulsed once. Amusement. "Interesting. You speak as if you lead a wolf pack, and yet you wear diplomacy like a veil." "I wear diplomacy like armor," Lynn said. "Not because I expect to be attacked, but because I remember what happens when humans forget to protect themselves." The Chiron's form stilled. "There's something the council hasn't asked," Vextal said quietly. "Something they should have. How much do you know?" Lynn didn't blink. "Enough. Enough to prevent war? Enough to prevent waste." Another silence, but this one wasn't tense. It was curious, and then the Chiron said something Lynn didn't expect. "We had contingency plans for you, too." She almost smiled. "Of course you did," she replied. "You're not stupid." "You were supposed to be simpler," Vextal said. "You rose fast, but we expected instability. Emotion, impulse. But instead, we found structure. That is not what frightened us. It's what intrigued us." Lynn allowed herself a step forward. Earth's strength isn't in dominance. It's an understanding. Every species in this chamber survived by being exceptional in one way. We survived by learning how to absorb all of you. Adaptation. Assimilation, Lynn corrected softly. Not to conquer, but to integrate. Vextal stasis field dimmed slightly. That was their version of contemplation. "Then consider this," it said. "There are others outside this chamber. Powers old enough to forget diplomacy. Those who observe from the deep void. If they notice your disclosure, They already have, Lynn said. That admission was not bluster. It was admission of risk. Earth's rise had not gone unnoticed. The Council systems were not the only ones Earth's models had mapped. In the quiet places between stars, Earth had seen things it did not name. Some of them watched back. I wonder, Vextal mused, if you've calculated them. Lynn didn't answer, not with words. She simply held his gaze. That was enough. The Chirunt emitted a slow pulse of light. Your species will change this chamber. But whether that change is refinement or rupture remains to be seen. And that, Lynn said, is the nature contingency. Vextal turned, reconfiguring its form. As it exited the corridor, it left behind no scent, no residue, only questions. Lynn exhaled slowly once she was alone. She knew what would follow. Debriefings, deniability, speculation from analysts across a dozen species. But the truth sat quietly within her. The real conflict had never been about survival. It was about narrative. For centuries, the Council had lived in the illusion of equilibrium. Earth's entrance had forced a new story, a reality where unpredictability no longer belonged to the primitive, but to the prepared. Later that cycle, as Lynn reviewed her reports in her quarters, she received a secure signal, encrypted so deeply that only one source could have sent it. Ian, the old director, appeared via holo, his features gaunt, voice roughened by too many secrets. I read the transcript, he said. And you didn't give them fear, he said. You gave them expectation. They needed it. No, Ian said. We need it. He leaned forward slightly. There are forces even you haven't modeled. Not because you miss them, but because they exist outside model logic. You've shown the galaxy how we think, how we plan. But Lynn, you've also told them where we are. I know, she said. Ian studied her. Do you ever sleep? Not during strategy phases. You may need to, he said, softer now. What you started, it won't end in a chamber. The line closed, and Lynn, alone again, turned back to her screen. She adjusted 3 scenario parameters in the web, upped the volatility index by 2%, ran a simulation where Earth's influence sparked not cooperation, but alliance polarization. The results were enlightening. She saved the report. Then she did something she hadn't done in months. She turned off the lights, sat in the dark, and listened not for danger, but for absence. The quiet was brief, but it reminded her what silence often meant in diplomacy. A pause before motion, a breath before impact. The Council vote was scheduled for the 7th rotation. A simple proposal, Earth's formal elevation to Tier 3 strategic participant. On the surface, it was ceremonial. In truth, it was permission to reshape the Accord's power balance from within. Lynn Sarai stood before the Earth delegation's secure console, her expression unreadable as always. The display glowed faint blue, rows of support and opposition accumulating in real time. So far, the vote held steady. 57% in favor. That number had to reach 64 before the final threshold was met. Not a guarantee. Not anymore. Her contingency web had predicted pushback from conservative blocs, the old empires with long shadows and longer memories. What it hadn't accounted for, at least not initially, was a hesitation from Earth's own allies, the kind that whispered. If humanity had planned for everyone, did that mean they'd also planned against them? Trust had never been the price of peace. Now it was the cost of assent. A soft chime cut through the room's quiet. Rear Admiral Kel Vero entered, stiff in a dress uniform that did little to dull his combat posture. His presence wasn't ceremonial. The protocol office had authorized him to stand ready with military escalation plans if diplomacy collapsed. He offered no greeting, only a nod. Lynn gestured toward the projection. We're stalling. Then unstall them. Would that it were so simple. You prepared for every species in the chamber. Tell me you accounted for cowardice. Cowardice, she said calmly, is a rational response to fear. What they're experiencing is doubt. Different flavor. Same consequences. Kel stepped closer. I thought the whole point of this circus was to avoid consequences. Lynn studied him. He wasn't wrong, but he didn't understand. This wasn't a demonstration of dominance, she said. It was a declaration of presence. We're not guests anymore. We live in this house now. Kel arched an eyebrow. You think metaphors will convince them? No, she said. But what comes next might. With a tap on the console, she triggered a narrowcast, non-invasive, encrypted, untraceable. One transmission, sent through a silent channel the council barely acknowledged. It wasn't a threat. Not exactly. It was proof. An attachment. Earth's contingency file on the Varn Collective. Redacted, yes, but not entirely. Enough for the Varn to recognize details that only someone close to them would know. The Varn had been publicly neutral. 5 minutes later, they cast their vote. Yes. Kel watched the board shift. That's one. Watch the cascade, Lynn murmured. The Chiron followed. Then the Lyri. Then the Saphari Accord. Like dominoes. Fear was never the goal. But predictability? That was intoxicating. Soon the vote reached 64%. Then 68. It passed with 71. Kel let out a low breath. Congratulations, Director. Lynn didn't move. This was the easy part. The chamber lights shifted, signaling an incoming council statement. Lynn walked alone to the central platform as the voice of the Accord, an AI composite of 3 linguistic paradigms, spoke. Earth has been elevated to Tier 3 strategic participant status. Effective immediately, it gains equal vote weight in matters of intersystem security, trade arbitration, and boundary policy. There was no applause. That wasn't the Accord's way. But the silence had changed again, dense, attentive. Lynn could feel it pressing against her skin. She activated her personal channel. On behalf of the United Diplomatic Agency, she began, I affirm our commitment to shared security and cooperative governance. Earth does not seek to unseat the Accord. We seek to strengthen it. Murmurs rippled. We understand that strength comes from foresight, not fear. We do not ask for your trust. We earn it. A pause. And we remind the Council, Earth's contingency systems exist not to destabilize, but to preserve, not to manipulate, but to understand. We do not act preemptively, but we will always act decisively. Her words rang like alloy. Later, as the chamber emptied, Lynn lingered. She knew better than to celebrate. In strategy, Ascension was not a victory. It was a new position on the board, and Earth had just become the piece everyone would now try to predict or eliminate. A soft tone sounded. Incoming message. Private channel. No ID. She accepted. The image that formed wasn't one she expected. A non-council entity. Unknown origin, faceless. Masked by fractal encryption. A being or intelligence so old the network itself struggled to resolve its data signature. It spoke in no known language. And yet she understood it. You have been seen. Lynn's breath slowed. You are not the only ones who plan. The signal ended. No trace left behind. She didn't move. Not for several seconds. Then she turned and activated Earth's secure relay. Initiate Gray Contingency Protocol. Cross-reference unknown contact. Activate deep monitor assets on Vector Zeta Krill. Confirmation code? Asked the relay. Director Lynn Sarai. Clearance Echelon 1. Code accepted. Gray Protocol. The one she had written for scenarios where Earth's foresight had met something older, colder, and utterly indifferent. Kel returned just as the lights dimmed again. You're still here, he said. We've been seen, she said. He frowned. By who? Something we didn't model. A silence passed between them. Then Kel said, Do you ever wonder if we're building a wall too high to climb down from? Lynn didn't answer immediately. She thought of Ian, of the void between stars, of the room full of species who now feared Earth less because of what it could do, and more because of what it knew. Finally, she said, walls can become prisons, but they can also be fortresses. The difference is whether you control the gate. Kel nodded once. And who you let in? They left the chamber together. No celebration. No final declaration. Just the quiet certainty that Earth had crossed the threshold, and on the other side waited the next game, played in darker halls, by older hands, But Lynn Sarai had never feared the dark. She had studied its patterns, mapped its depths, and written plans for how to answer when it finally called her name.